So you want to know how to create a character using the HarnMaster Kethira rules. No worries, I can help. Let's review briefly what this video is not going to be. This is not a simple 46 drop the lowest dice routine to generate our typical SDCIWC stats so we can toss a d20 every now and then. As HarnMaster has a reputation for realism in a fantasy world, generating a character is going to involve no less detail than one would expect for such a world. We're not just here to crank out stats. We're also not here to make Todd the local farmer who knows nothing beyond the edge of his barley field. Although we can certainly do that if we want, most newcomers to the HarnMaster system want to play heroes and heroines. What we do want to make is a character with some depth, someone worthy of adventuring in a realistic game world. We want someone with skills, someone with some sort of expertise, even if for just a supportive role. That's what we're here to create. We want to create a person, a character, an adventurer. We want someone with a backstory, someone with some sense of history. We want someone with strengths as well as weaknesses, just like a real person would have. For this demonstration, we will utilize the HarnMaster Kethira rule set and the HarnMaster self-calculating character sheet. Both of these are available on Celestia.com. The rules can be bought and acquired immediately in PDF format, or you could spend a little extra and get a printed copy. The character sheet is available for free under the Free Stuff heading. Feel free to pause this video, purchase the rules, download the character sheet, and follow along. Or, if you're not sure about HarnMaster yet, by all means, keep watching and see what you think. So, without further ado, welcome to HarnMaster Kethira. Let's take a quick review of the sheet and the way it's organized. Then we can start generating a mostly random person and see who comes out the other end. First, here is the character sheet. This is page 1, and this is page 2, off on the backside. Some might think it looks a little busy at first glance, right? Well, let's be fair. Many character sheets do look a little busy to the uninitiated. Let's dig in and see if we can make some sense of it all. Let's go back to page 1, and let's look at the top section. What do we have here? Well, I see our attributes section. Want to start there and get rolling some dice? No, says Miss Crabtree. I'm not that kind of demo. Remember, overview first, okay? Now then, since we're making a character, we'll begin with the beginning, as good a place as any, am I right? And a character's beginning is at birth, not adulthood. Why? Well, we not only get the name your character's parents bestowed upon your character, but you also get nifty things like the date and place of birth. Well, why are those nifty? Because these will provide important characteristics, such as the influence the stars had upon personality formation by way of the zodiac, and into what culture your character was born. Next, we have information on your character's family. What is the type of society in which your character was reared? Was it very populous and metropolitan, or perhaps it was a rural manorial fief, or maybe even a tribal society tucked away deep in the wilderness? To what social class did his or her family belong, and therefore your character too? What occupations did these parents have, as some of these skills will likely rub off on their children? How popular is your character amongst the family? And in what religious traditions was he or she raised? Next, we have something called standing. How does your character earn a living? Is it through crafts, services, the sword, or even via the charity of others? Where is home? And to what level of wealth and livelihood is your character currently accustomed? Then we have traits. The zodiac has influences on behavior, but it also has influences on fate, a concept on which we'll touch only briefly in a moment. Combined with the sun sign behaviors, what is the character's moral compass? Craven and concerned only with selfish wants and needs? overly pious, holding steadfast to moral principles, many though they might be? Or perhaps somewhere in the middle, someone with moral principles, but also capable of sin and its ever-present companion, guilt. Maybe your character even has some psychological vulnerabilities, such as being easily angered or impetuous. And then we have the influence of the gods and fate itself. Characters will be bound up in fate, and as such, your character will have fate points to help improve levels of success during critical moments in his or her adventuring life. Some characters may also begin the game already marked by the gods for special favors, and these are handled by grace and piety. Now, young aspirant, now we come to where your eyes have been focused all of this time. Attributes. HarnMaster Kethira will use 2 sets of 6 attributes each, 1 set for physical attributes and 1 set for mental attributes. These combine in pairs to determine your skill bases, and then in turn how skillful of a character you are, and how unskilled too. More on that shortly. Lastly, you can even randomly generate your appearance if you'd like, from complexion and eye color all the way down to even left or right-handedness, or even ambidexterity. So up to this point, we'll have your character's attributes, some sense of personal history, and current occupation, among several other narrative elements. Let's turn our focus to skills, located on the bottom half of the first page. HarnMaster has always been a skills-based system, not one based on character levels and experience points per se. The first thing you may notice, then, is that there are already several skills written on your character sheet. These are the automatic skills that all characters possess to some degree or other. For now, let's keep it simple with just a review of the sections. We'll dig deeper into all this once we begin making a random character. There are 7 sections of skills. There are skills that your character will use in social situations, such as charm, discourse, and intrigue, just to name some already listed. There's even a skill for your character's native tongue, to tell you how extensive his or her vocabulary is, which might come in handy when speaking with one's betters, or the more educated classes. Then there are lore skills, which often cover knowledge-based skills, like folklore or heraldry, but even include things like basic literacy and the ever-important physician skill. So you can patch up your character's basic boo-boos at a minimum. There is a section for physical skills, to tell us how skilled our character is with physical feats and general awareness of what's going on nearby. The nature skills group will have skills in it such as survival, which you can see as a universal skill, but it can also have herb lore, tracking, mineralogy, and agriculture, among others. The craft skills section contains most, but not all, of the skills related to a craft or trade. These will be things like smithing skills, lock craft, or textile craft. The combat section is certainly critical for combat-heavy adventures and characters. Finally, the Esoterica section lists all of the skills we need for spiritual combat, as well as arcane spells and talents. Yes, in HarnMaster, even spells are skills to be used, just like everything else. So that wraps up the first page, all of the basic information we need about our character. If we now look at page 2, we see a lot of information that seems to relate to combat. For this reason, when we make a character, we're going to copy and modify many of the items from page 1 just to have them conveniently on the same page here when we need them, rather than flipping pages and such. For now, let's take a quick tour of how this sheet is laying out. The Combat Skills section gives us quick access to the skills most often used in combat situations. The Encumbrance section is used to calculate any penalties that might be imposed due to carrying heavy loads. These will factor greatly into skills tests, including combat, as well as maximum movement. And, of course, right on cue, That leads us directly over to maximum movement rates, especially once Encumbrance is factored in. Next, we copy down the weapons carried by the character, whether it's in hand or as gear. And we do the same for missile weapons. Now, all of the relevant information for weaponry is available on our character profile for when we enter combat. We then record what clothing and armor items our character is actually wearing. Here, we have our hit locations, which we fill out with layered armor protection values. It also lists the accompanying shock values for each location and potential hazards associated with getting wounded in those parts. Should your character sustain an injury from combat, spells, falls, and the like, they're recorded in the injury section along with the severity level and the associated healing rate. Now in this section here, we list references for impact severities, shock states, shock roll results, and a section to record ongoing ailments such as poisons and diseases. The fatigue section is also a critical section. As your character undertakes ongoing physical activity or succumbs to ailments, fatigue will eventually set in, negatively affecting almost all skills tests. The types of fatigue, accrual rates, and effects are recorded here. We also record the ever-important endurance secondary roll target number, which gives hardy characters a chance to mitigate some of these effects. There are also stress conditions. Sometimes your character may develop mental disorders, often due to traumatic situations. Aural shock may result from encounters with ethereals and spirits. And then there's the dreaded shadow of Buckrai, the presence of soul-destroying sheer nothingness that pervades the followers and creations of the mad god Morgath. Finally, we have a section for recording all of your character's other gear, possessions, residences, and workshops, as well as any other notes you wish to record, perhaps about relationships made, or maybe even those soured. That concludes the summary of the character sheet. Have a moment to take all of that in. Feel free to pause, glance it over on the downloadable sheet from Calestia.com, and when you're ready, come on back and resume. Or, if you're impatient like me, let's plow on and see how this works when we generate a mostly random character. Before we get busy making a character, let's have a quick preface. For starters, let me get some buts out of the way. I'm going to jump around the sheet a little bit, but my hope is that you can follow along nicely. We're going to follow along with the HarnMaster Kethira steps of the character creation process, but there will be times when I have some while we're at it moments and do things a little out of order just to complete some sections and be done with them. I will generate random numbers from rolladie.net, and I will sometimes do several at once. But, for the sake of time, you're not going to actually see that happening. Turns out, slows things down a lot. After I generate the numbers, I will then sometimes pull up the pertinent references from HarnMaster Kethira and populate the fields. But, at other times, I'm just going to populate the fields. I don't want to get overly aggressive and run into potential copyright issues. And one more thing. It'll be a heck of a lot easier understanding what's going on if I can just give you the simplest, briefest summary of HarnMaster Gaming itself. That way, we can get you some sort of frame of reference, and the results of this process can start to make sense. At its core, any HarnMaster game is a game of skills tests and skills competitions. These are made with percentile dice in most cases, with the occasional D10 roll thrown in here and there. Some rolls get modified by other rolls or situations. Some rolls get modifiers based on the competency of other skills. But the results of all rolls are either successes, failures, or degrees of successes and failures. This applies across the board, from seeing if you successfully crafted an item, to sneaking up on a watchful guard, trying to win a public argument, the successful casting of spells, calling on your god for aid, and even combat itself, especially combat, where what might normally have been a successful strike can also be knocked away by an opponent's successful skill with a shield. It's all quite simple and elegant, if I do say so myself, despite the system's great depths of detail and variation. That should be sufficient for now. We're going to save the details of the skills tests and how to play for another video. We just want to concern ourselves with what you need to know in order to understand the character we're making. All right, let's start with the birth section first. Different fields are going to call for different dice, but the most common one used in character generation is the D100. We roll a D100 for folk and age group, and we get 39 and 45. For date of birth, we roll a D12 for the month and a D30 for the day, and we get 726. And then for birthplace, we roll a D1000 first, and then a D100, and we get 898 and 63. These numbers tell us that we have a human in the young age group, meaning he'll be between 20 and 29 years old. The birth date is the 26th of Azura, which gives us a sun sign of Heron, the eagle. Well, what does that do for us? Well, as a Heronin, this character will have some internal resentment towards authority, while external actions are described as swift, precise, intelligently aloof, and even merciless. It turns out Heron's fate favors physical skills and, to a lesser degree, combat and lore skills. Heron's fate moves largely against nature skills and, to a lesser extent, craft and social skills. Let's keep that in mind as we continue. A birthplace of 898 corresponds with Trierzon, a powerful feudal realm on the mainland of Venarave with mighty standing armies. The 63 shows us that our character was born in Melisuma County. Moving down to the family section now. Being in Melisuma County tells us that our society is feudal. We roll a D20 for our parents' social class and get 16. We roll D100s for parent occupation, background, and estrangement, and we get 14, 21, and 75. For Pantheon, we just write in West Venarian, which we get from growing up in Melisuma County. When we look up these values, we learn that we grew up in a military family, and at least one of our parents was a man-at-arms. The 21 tells us we grew up in an urban environment, as opposed to on a rural fief. This might not be where our character lives now. We might live far away from Trierzon altogether, but this is where we grew up. A 75 tells us that our character was quite popular within the family. Well, that's a good sign, right? Now, we're still at the beginning of it all, but look what's emerging already. A child was born into a military type of family where perhaps the dad, in this case, was a man-at-arms in an urban setting. Maybe the personal guard of a wealthy patron, or maybe just a member of the city guard. I don't know yet. Let's make this character female. She was born under the sign of Heron, so the fates favor a physical, combative type, and someone with a little problem with being told what to do. And she's well loved by her parents, possibly even with any siblings and extended family, if we so choose. The base layer on the canvas has been painted, right? I don't know. I think it's kind of cool. We'll skip standing for now. We're not ready for that yet. Instead, let's just shoot right over to what you've been waiting for. That's right. Let's generate those attributes. We did have to wait for this part because the number of dice we roll depends on our age group. Since we're young, we're going to roll 5d6 and drop the worst 2 for physical attributes. For mental, we roll 4d6 and drop the lowest. After using the old random die roller, we get physical attributes of 12, 13, 13, 15, 17, and another 17. Random numbers that don't decline. Interesting. We roll mental attributes of 11, 14, 13, 14, 12, and 17. So already, it looks like I could make a great warrior type. Now, to be fair, the inner creative in me wants to go the other way. But because I don't want to get fancy yet, let's just follow the lead, all right? I like the idea of my warrior being graceful, yet tough. So I'll put the 17s in agility and endurance. I feel obligated to put the 15 in strength, so I'm going to do that. If she's going to go into combat, she's going to need strength to mitigate the encumbrance of the gear she's going to be carrying and wearing. I'll put the 12 in comeliness. It's still an above average stat, but I just don't like the idea of Hottie McHotpants over here that all the fellas in the mess hall are going to go gaga over. That's going to leave the 13s in dexterity and perception. She's pretty strong mentally, too. I'd like her to be strong-headed and willful, so the 17 is going to go in will. I also want to have a softer side, so I'll put the 14s in both empathy and eloquence. I don't see her as particularly sensitive to the spirit world, so the 11's going to go in aura. And that leaves me with putting, I guess, the 12 in reasoning and the 13 in creativity. Just 'cause. Looks like it's coming together now. Before we move on from this, I need to point something out. Our attribute scores are all derived from D6s. However, notice there's also a multiple of that score. These are our attribute skills. Although there will be more on this in future videos, just know that there are times you will test an attribute as if it was a skill. And this would be the equivalent number for that reference. Because remember, HarnMaster is, at its core, a game of skills. Heading back over to traits, let's find out what's going on in that character's head. First, we roll a d6 for the sun sign trait, and we get a 3. For morality, this gets a bit different. Morality is going to be a kind of an attribute, but we have a lot of liberties here. We're going to roll 4d6, but we get to keep whatever 3 we want. That's going to correspond to the desired available morality. So in this case, we're going to get a 4, 5, 1, and 5. These can combine to 10, 11, or 14, I think. I'm pretty sure about that. We're going to come back to that. I'm saying a lot of that during this part. Just bear with me. Now, moving on, we're going to roll 3 more d20s. One is going to be for arcane talents, which we can kind of think of like these natural psychic powers if y'all are going to use those. There's going to be a d20 for grace and one for psyche. And I roll a 10, a 12, and a 3. So into what does all that translate? The sun sign trait says she's opportunistic. For morality, I like the higher morality score, as I'm already forming in my head her faith inclinations. So I'm going to choose the 14 for morality, which gives us principled. In HarnMaster, a principled morality describes someone who is, quote, a generous person, reluctant to cause suffering and troubled by guilt when it happens. With a lower empathy, which is not the case for our character, the person is much less self-aware of committing an occasional sin, such as vanity or hatred. End quote. With an aura of 11, the talent score produces no result. The grace roll of 12 indicates nothing either. This is unfortunate. I would have liked her to have been marked for grace, which would have increased the chances of her being favored by her god. And then the psyche result of 3 gives no mental disorders, so she seems relatively stable. Both fortunate and not as exciting. C'est la vie. Technically, we're ready to pick our occupation, but I want to wrap up our person first. Let's see what she looks like, shall we? We go over to the appearance section, and we roll some D100s for complexion, hair, eyes, height, and handedness. Weight will be determined by height and strength, plus an additional 3d6. We roll, and we get 30, 97, 39, 51, and 29. This tells us that, being from a middle latitude in Venarave, which is where Trierzon is located, she is of medium complexion, white hair, which I'm just going to assume is like the blondest of blondes. I don't think I've ever seen a young lady with naturally white hair. Brown eyes, and she's right-handed. With a strength of 15, she is 73 inches tall. I mean, she's an Amazon. And she's weighing in at 179 pounds? You go, girl. Dang. We're supposed to add another 3d6 worth of weight here, but you know what? I'm keeping this 179. For a strong, tall woman, I think that sounds about right. Sue me. So let's tackle our occupation finally and get our standing in society. If I look back at the military occupations in a feudal society, there are a few options. And I don't have to stick to those, but that's what I want to do here. And there are two that really stand out. Man-at-arms and mercenary. In my opinion, mercs have a little more negative reputation, but they also have the best options for adventure. Yet the two are quite similar in skills. I think I'm going to go mercenary for her, so we write that in. I don't know where I'm calling home yet, so we're going to leave that alone. Honestly, for this video, we're not going to know by the end. This is just something that we're going to work out with the Game Master. For wealth, though, we determined this through a combination of how much in funding her family provided her as she set out on her own, and combine that with how much she has earned already by the time we begin. I think it's worth noting that when she begins her adventuring career, she has already been established in her profession. She's not green, per se. It's just that there's still a lot of experiences to be had, or at least hopefully, right? Let's determine what our family has provided. I'm going to use the optional wealth advantage rule, which allows me to roll an extra die and drop the lowest for each. For family funds, we roll, in this case, D3s for the family occupation of man-at-arms, and we roll 4 of these because she's popular, plus the extra. So a 5d3 drop the lowest gives her 11. Nice! To this, we roll more D3s, this time for her mercenary income, and we roll 1 die since she's young, plus the extra. 2d3 drop the lowest gives her 2. She starts off with a wealth value of 13, which is awfully high for a mercenary. Our mercenary likes to live what is called a comfortable lifestyle, most likely living in either a modest townhouse or a large cottage, and she's accustomed to nice clothing and ample meals. Maybe there's a little bit of a spoiled streak running through her, huh? She's opportunistic, remember? Seems like it's been working out. What we'll need to remember for later then, when we get around to equipping her, is that she'll have wealth, that 13, times 100 to spend on gear, and she cannot keep the change. Use it or lose it. And then she'll have wealth times 10 in actual coins, and that we can either spend or keep. That's going to be 1,300 silver pennies to equip herself, plus another 130 if necessary. That's a very decent amount for a merc. Thus far, this process has given us a nice progression on this character. Once again, we didn't just crank out some SDC IWC stats, copy over some level 1 numbers, and prepare to launch on a campaign of murdering as many comedically fictional beasties as we can in order to inexplicably and suddenly learn how to climb a sheer wall of ice better. Instead, we have a young girl born under the sign of Heron, just as the harvests were coming in and the weather turned cooler. Born in the powerful feudal realm of Trierzon, where militaries are powerful and careers aplenty. Born to a father, in this case, who was a man-at-arms in an urban settlement in Melisuma County. Raised in a loving family, adored by her immediate and extended family. learned to seize opportunities as they presented themselves, and often succeeded. Disciplined to be generous and kind, adhering to strong moral principles, and overcome with guilt when she sins. Grew into a tall, graceful, strong woman thanks to years of learning martial arts from her father. Developed a strong sense of willpower and concurrently an uncanny knack to endure discomfort, exertion, and suffering. Came to appreciate the world as others might see it, and was graced with the ability to communicate as well. Then, after coming of age, she saw opportunities in joining with a more mobile mercenary unit, and has clearly enjoyed some success with that too. All the way up to today, where she manages to live, somewhere yet to still be determined, in either a large cottage or her own decent little townhouse, surrounded by the occasional luxury and nice clothes. I really like how this has unfolded so far. With that done, it's time to get more granular and into the actual game elements we'll be using. We're going to skip Fate and Piety for now, and instead we're going to turn to the skills section. Without the auto-calculating character sheet from Calestra.com, this can take a bit more time, as you'll need to average attribute scores manually per skill. Thankfully, this sheet suits us well for a simple tutorial, as it will speed us along while still achieving the same objective. First, notice that all of the automatic skills have populated on their own once we entered our attributes. There's a column labeled SB, that's for skill base, and a column labeled ML for mastery level. We get the skill base by averaging two stats together. We get the mastery level by multiplying that skill base times a skill multiple. During this part of the character creation process, we obtain and improve skills by spending development points to improve multipliers. Thus, if we spend 1 development point on drawing, which has a default multiplier of 1, we would improve that multiplier to 2. Similarly, if we want to get a new skill, such as herb lore, we would spend 1 development point to raise what is essentially a multiplier of 0 to 1. When finished, we compute our mastery levels by multiplying the skill bases by their corresponding skill multipliers. Second, a quick word about skills and mastery levels. This will be almost the entire crux of the HarnMaster Kethira game system. Nearly the entire game, as we said before, comes down to skills tests, which we'll cover in an upcoming tutorial. These tests are going to be made on a D100. The higher the number, the more expertise the character has. This number can actually rise above 100, but that's beyond our scope for right now. Third, for points of reference, HarnMaster Kethira gives us some verbal cues or references as to the levels of competence. So if a skill is less than 50 in mastery level, people would say that that character is inept. If the skill is in the 50s, then she's said to be a novice. In the 60s, an aspirant. In the 70s, a professional. In 80s, an expert. And 90s and above, a paragon. Let's tuck that away in the back of our mind for now. Instead, let's proceed to acquire and develop our skills, which is maybe the longest but most certainly important part of character creation. For starters, we're going to get one quirky little skill out of the way. The singing skill uses a voice attribute, which is not one of our normal attributes used for anything else. Real quick, we roll 4d6, drop the lowest, and complete that calculation. My roll is 11, so we write that in and start off with a singing skill at 36. So she has an average female voice, but if we don't develop this further, she can't sing for poop. With that completed, now let's go through the rest of HarnMaster Kethira's skill development routine for our character. First is to assign folk skills. Since this only applies if we're playing certain non-human characters, we skip this. That's step 1 done. Second is to deal with the outcome of our arcane talent roll from earlier. Nothing was indicated on that roll, so we're done for step 2. Nothing to do. All right, moving on. Third, we assign and develop family skills that we acquired in childhood and early adolescence. So here's how this works. I have 5 development points to spend. I get to develop only the skills listed on the parent's occupation. If I don't have that skill already, spending 1 development point lets me get that skill at a skill multiple of 1. Finally, just for this step of family skills, the maximum number of development points I can spend on a skill is equal to half of the listed number in the occupation, rounded down. That means for any skill that the parental occupation has at 1, I can't get. Understand? Half of 1 is 1/2, rounded down to 0. So I can only choose from those listed as a multiplier of 2 or more. Furthermore, any skill that is at 4, I can spend 2 points on that if I want, right? Since half of 4 is 2. Let's look at that man of arms occupation. I can't spend any points on archery, initiative, or physician because they have a listed multiplier value of 1. There are 5 other skills, though, listed at 2, and since I can only spend 1 point on each, and I have 5 points to spend, this is pretty easy for me. This means I do the following. I spend 1 development point each on melee, throwing, and survival. On my character sheet, I increase the skill multiple for each by 1. So melee and throwing go to 3, and survival goes to 2. I spend 1 development point each on heraldry and weaponcraft. I write heraldry in under lore, and I put a skill multiple of 1. I write weaponcraft in under craft, and I put a skill multiple of 1 there as well. If I didn't have the auto-calculating character sheet, which I do, I would also calculate and write in the skill bases of these 2 new skills. Heraldry averages reasoning and will, and since reasoning is listed first, if it is the greater attribute, we would round up, otherwise we round down. For heraldry then, we average 12 and 17, rounding down to 14. For weaponcraft, we average 13 and 15 to get 14 as well. From here on, we're going to let the sheet auto-calculate these skill bases. I just wanted you to see how that's done. Such are the skills our character learned from her dad. There are a few other things we do on this step. We figure out how extensive her vocabulary is at this point. As a member of the military class, she begins with a skill multiple of 4 in her native tongue, which is Trierzi. We determine her religious leanings in this part too. With a martial upbringing, a martial profession, a principled morality, a feudal society, and being a woman, I will yield to the strong leanings towards Lorani, the Lady of Paladins. I identify her ritual skill as such, writing in Lorani. And since she is not a member of the clergy or a fighting order, she'll simply start with a skill multiple of 1. There is an option here for her to get some extra language points. If we knew where we were going to adventure by discussing this with our game master, we could spend those on a foreign language if the adventure is going to be outside of Trierzen. Things being what they are, we'll skip this and we'll move on. Fourth in our skills acquisition process, we acquire skills from our neighborhood. Our character grew up in an urban setting, so we are provided a list of such available skills. Now, if we're trying to min-max a character for a particular archetype, we might find this list a little disappointing. Yet, once again, let's remember, we're making a character, a person. So let's put a little creativity into this. Given what we've developed so far, I don't see much draw towards brewing, ceramics, drawing, intrigue, or even seamanship. although nothing stops us from making such a backstory. Instead, here's what draws my attention. As someone physical, I see an appeal towards dancing. As a mercenary who may be able to ride a steed, especially in combat, I see an interest in animal craft. I think cookery could be in order too, as someone who has leanings towards the finer things in life. Maybe she's not too satisfied with hard tack while on the trail, preferring instead to whip up something with a little more flavor and pizzazz. For these background skills, we have 5 development points to spend. And the catch is, I can't spend more than 2 points per background skill. Let's put 2 points in cookery to bring it to a multiplier of 4, 2 points in animal craft, which we have to add as a new nature skill, and add 1 point to dancing to bring it to 3. Fifth, for our actual occupation skills, we add or improve all skills listed for the mercenary occupation by precisely the listed values. This means, after increasing these multipliers, melee and throwing are now at 5, survival, intrigue, and initiative are at 4, weaponcraft and heraldry are at 3, and physician is at 2. Sixth, we are awarded 5 additional development points to obtain or improve any skills that we want, with 2 restrictions. We can only spend 1 development point per skill unless that skill has not received any development points so far. Then it can get 2. No skills in the Esoterica group can be improved unless they have at least a single multiple point by now. Before we go distributing these points, there's one more thing we need to know. We already have some skills with a multiple of 5. If we wish to develop any skill beyond a skill multiple of 5 during character creation, then we start to improve them using what is called mastery boosts. For the sake of brevity, let's just say you get diminishing returns on developing such skills. You know what? Actually, no. Let me give you a quick example of this, just so you can see what I'm talking about. Let's pretend I add a point to melee. It's already at a skill multiple of 5, so I can't add another multiple. Instead, I advance this as a mastery boost, which is still going to cost me 1 development point. At a skill multiple of 5, I begin play with a melee at a mastery level of 75. Just to be clear, that means I have a base chance of 75% success on an unopposed, unmodified roll. Now I want to make that better. Using a mastery boost, I see that a mastery level of 75 allows me to improve the skill by another 5 points to 80, instead of what in this case would be another 15 points of the skill base to 90. See what I mean? Had to spend the same development point. More powerful, but diminished return. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to improve archery twice, physician once more, and you see, I really like charm here. She's opportunistic, and therefore I think she's totally open to using her feminine gifts to her advantage. Now, charm will have a multiple of 5. Physician 3, still sucks, and archery 3. Seventh, if we were playing a mature or old character, we'd get more 5-point development phases to reflect our expertise acquired over the years. I mean, that'd be great, but we're young, so we're done here too. Eighth, and finally on the skill section, we get extra development points based on our sun sign. For Heron, this gives us 3 development points we can use on any physical skills, and 1 point on any single skill in each of the combat and lore skills. Now, clearly, I'm going to raise that physician skill by 1, so there goes the lore point. I'll spend the combat point on archery and raise that to a more respectable 4. And then for physical, I'll spend 1 on dancing, 1 on climbing, and 1 on awareness. Conveniently, all of those now have multiples of 4. To finish up page 1, let's talk a little bit about fate. Fate is a mechanic that lets players try to improve a success level of a test. The ideal concept here is that should your character fail at like a critical or dramatic moment of the adventure, you can spend a fate point and try a test to see if you can improve that success level. Basically, all characters are going to start with 5 fate points, so we fill that in up top. The base fate roll is related to your character's aura. With an aura of 11, our mercenary has a base mastery level on the fate roll of 50. But here's the thing. Look at the fate modifiers from herein, which also appear next to each skill group. These are modifiers to that fate roll, and the modifier is based on that failed skill test we're trying to improve. What this means is, this herein in mercenary gains favor on fate rolls to improve the results from physical, combat, and lore tests, but she's going to be penalized on fate rolls to improve the results from failed nature, social, and craft tests. The second items to wrap up are Piety and the Blessing bonus. Piety is for religious characters, whether they are clergy or laity. If you play a non-believer, you would probably skip this part. I don't see our mercenary as eager to join the clerical and fighting orders of the Loranian Church. However, I do see her as being a strong believer. She is laity, so she is said to belong to no circle of her religion, as piety is equal to a character's circle plus 1, she begins with 1 piety. At the startup, this is both her maximum piety as well as her current piety, so we're going to record both. That's great. What do I do with piety now? That leads us to the Blessing bonus, an incentive to actually roleplay a faithful character. When characters actively participate in their religions, they receive bonuses to certain skills. And religious characters, even laity, begin the game with a blessing bonus of their ritual skill index. An index is just the number in the tens place. The ritual skill index plus 1. So in this case, the ritual index, the tens, is a 1 plus 1 gives us a blessing bonus of 2. If she grows her ritual skill to, say, 54, then her blessing bonuses would increase to 6, right? 5 plus 1. This bonus gets applied to a piety number of skills as allowed by the religion. In our case, as a laity follower of Lorani, with a piety of 1, I can apply this bonus to either initiative or writing. Well, our merc isn't a big writer type so far, so we're going to use that for initiative. We'll write all of that in under blessing. So how long does it last? Generally, the blessing bonus lasts for 30 days, except for new characters. For us, this bonus will last until our next ceremony, which for Loranian laity is on the 5th, 15th, and 25th of every month. We are now finished with page 1 of the character sheet. Take a look at the mastery levels for each skill our character has. Remember earlier when I referenced verbal cues for character competence? With those in mind, we can describe our mercenary's expertise and deficiencies thusly. She possesses the basic grasp of Trierzi grammar, letting her fit right in with the common folk with whom she most likely and most often associates. She can talk shop with the average person, but she'll be a little out of place when talking to betters and academics. People would consider her a professional combatant despite her young age. She can hold her own when throwing weapons and objects, combat experience, wilderness survival, awareness, climbing, dancing, and charm. She has the basic concepts of intrigue and cookery and archery. People would notice she gets it, but that she still needs a little bit of practice. Everything else, she's just kind of considered inept. Gonna be real weird when she's the one who gets to stitch you up. On page 2, despite how busy it might look, I suspect this is actually going to go a bit faster. Well, at least for our video. We're going to jump around here because, well, that's what the process calls for. We start by just copying over some values from page 1. Initiative is 60, awareness 60, dodge 75, and shock 64. Evasion, we might be able to calculate that right now, but we're going to have to leave that alone until we determine things like encumbrance. Now it's time to go shopping. Remember our wealth of 1,300 silver pennies and our 130 pennies in actual coin? We're going to use that to outfit our character. For hand-to-hand weapons, I will get her a spear and round shield for routine combat, if there is such a thing, a short sword for getting in close, and a dagger just in case. With her archery skill, I want to get her a longbow, and I'll pick up some heavy, broad arrows too. For each of these, I'll fill in their information so it will be available when combat occurs. As for combat, we're saving that for a later video. She has money to spend, and because she's in a mercenary company of some sort, we're going to get her a male Bernie outfit, which is an assortment of armor that is often not affordable for many young characters. This comes with a plate helm, padded cap, male Bernie itself, padded tunic, cloth trousers, cloth swaddle, and leather boots. It's important to note all of these individual items for when we get to the armor profile. Finally, I buy some necessities and some not-so-necessities to fill her out. I acquire surgical tools, bandages, a backpack, bedroll, and several other items because I think they'll be necessary. However, I also buy items I believe she would bring with her. A nice change of clothes for social situations, soap, cookware, and a religious item. We record all of these in our possessions section. When all is said and done, I have spent 1,411 silver pennies. After digging into my 130 in coins, I'm left to start with 19 silver pennies. To wrap up this section, I like to write in the weights for each item because encumbrance is an integral part of the HarnMaster skill system. For now, without getting into the nuances, I total her carried weight of everything, assuming she's wearing her armor, at 46.2 pounds. Just as a note, if she can drop and pop off her backpack before entering combat, then she'll only be carrying 28.1 pounds. With our armor purchased, we find out which armor articles protect which areas of the body, and we total the protective values for each article at that location that may be overlapping. Each material has its own protective values versus blunt, edge, point, and fire or frost damage. In terms of gameplay, should our character get struck, the severity of the impact will be reduced by the protective values at the struck location. Some rigid armors even provide extra protection against edge attacks and might negate lesser damage altogether. We make note of that here in the body location section. Thankfully, the male Bernie outfit we purchased is pre-configured for us in the HarnMaster Kethira book, so I don't have to math at all. I just need to fill in all the values. Should, however, a blow penetrate the armor, we would record wounds in the neighboring injury box. But it'll be a sad day when your character begins her adventuring career on a stretcher. In other words, there's nothing left for us to do here. There is, however, a very important item for you to know about, even though we don't use it during character creation. That HB, that stands for Healing Base, which is derived by averaging your will and endurance. Since both are 17, our mercenary has a 17 healing base. Well, what is that? When you sustain wounds, they need to heal. And you need to be aware that in Harn, there aren't caravans of healing potion merchants or beneficent priests just tossing out healing spells willy-nilly to the masses. A healing base is to healing what a skill base is to mastery levels. Depending on the care you receive, you will receive healing rolls that are multiples of your healing base. So this is a figure you generally want to be pretty high if possible. But I digress. With all of our gear purchased and equipped, we return to the encumbrance box. One of the things that's neat is that an armor's weight doesn't count against you when you're actually wearing it. Instead, it has its own encumbrance rating. Our male Bernie has an encumbrance penalty of 5, so we write that down for armor. When it comes to gear carried, she'll gain 5 encumbrance for every 20 pounds carried. For this, I'm going to record the worst case scenario by assuming she gets caught in combat fully loaded. If that's the case, since she carries 46.2 pounds, that gives her 10 for gear, so we write that in. This is mitigated by her strength, and with a score of 15, she gets minus 10 to encumbrance. This leaves her with a total encumbrance of 5. Therefore, she has a 5-point penalty to move, agility tests, and any skill that uses agility. That could potentially affect evasion. For this character, we don't worry about any bulk penalties. Just know that if you start layering clothing and armor, you can acquire additional encumbrance. An example of this would be an armored character wearing additional items due to extreme Arctic conditions. But before we move on, let me point something out. I said this is the worst case scenario. What I actually have envisioned is that before a known encounter, or provided that she has the time, she can pop off that backpack, which will remove 14.1 pounds, enough to reduce her gear encumbrance to 5, and then give her 0 penalties. Does that make sense? Now we can calculate our move rates. As a human, we have a base movement rate of 50 feet in a round. We add to this a modifier obtained from the average of agility and strength. With a result of 16, this gives our mercenary a plus 15 to her base move. We record her move as 65. Our encumbrance reduces this, and this becomes our effective move. So our effective move is 60. From here, we determine that a half move is 30, a full move is 60, and a double move is 120. And also with our encumbrance, let's pop back over to our combat skills. Since encumbrance impacts move, agility, and any skill that involves agility, we apply it to our dodge, as dodge uses agility and perception. This gives us our effective dodge. And from this effective dodge, we grab its index, in this case, still 7, and multiply it by 5. Therefore, our evasion is 35. To wrap it all up, let's understand that as our character undertakes physical feats, she's going to accrue fatigue. The rate and means by which this happens is varied, but most often it's going to come from things like swimming and sprinting or prolonged action. Characters accrue fatigue differently, but the formula is the same. We take our current encumbrance penalty and add 5 to that. For our mercenary, we have a twofer situation, right? If we are fully geared, then our personal fatigue, PF, the rate at which we accrue fatigue, is 10. If, however, we have dropped our backpack, or it's on a beast of burden, then our encumbrance is 0, remember, and therefore our personal fatigue becomes 5, the bare minimum. Lastly, there is the endurance secondary roll target number. Well, what is that? Simply put, there are times when, while accruing fatigue, you may be able to mitigate some of its accrual. To do this, you'd roll against your endurance secondary roll target number. This number is quite simply our endurance skill index. Remember, way earlier, we noticed that there was an attribute skill number in addition to the attribute itself? Well, Here's a reference to that. Because the endurance attribute skill is 85, our endurance index is 8, a most excellent number. Well, at this point, I think all we have left to do is give her a name, and that's a wrap. You know, Tom Petty was full of crap. The naming is the hardest part. Thankfully, I've had time to prepare, and although it might not be with much fanfare, I'm just going to call her Delwig. And there she is, our tall, tough, but somewhat merry, opportunistic soldier of fortune, both devoted to the feudal hierarchical structure while innately resentful of authority. I'll say she inherited her charms and love of the more domestic talents, cooking, dancing, as well as her pride in her femininity from her mother, while also inheriting her love of the martial arts from her doting father. She's taken advantage of nearly every opportunity presented before her, and depending on where we start our adventuring career, she'll live rather well for her station, either in a decent townhouse or a large rural cottage. We can put a bow on this if you'd like. Should you purchase the system, you can always use this video as a quickish reference, or better yet, share it with players before their first character generation session. If, on the other hand, you want more, well, let's go for some bonus round information, shall we? I mean, I just can't leave well enough alone, can I? There are a handful of other backstory gems that HarnMaster Kethira lets us generate if we so choose, and I do so choose. Gems like, does Delwig have any brothers and sisters? After some generation routines, we arrive at this. Her parents had a total of 4 children. The first was a daughter, but she is now deceased. That's a tragedy that likely hangs over the parents. The kids who came after, not so much. She has an older brother and a younger sister. Well, if I think about that for a minute, that might help explain the doting father I have in mind, right? The first child was a girl, and she died. I don't know if she died in infancy yet. She died from an accident. I don't know. The point is she's dead. So maybe the dad looks at Delwig, the next daughter to be born, and is trying to make up for things with her. It's just a thought. The dynamics of these relationships are totally up to us. There's a routine to find out if she's already in some sort of intimate relationship at the outset of play. Sadly, and most uninterestingly, it turns out Delwig is swinging single with 0 interests or prospects. Maybe that's to be expected of the mercenary on the go. Or maybe she's just too self-absorbed to want to share her fortunes, or really any number of reasons. There's a routine to see if she has any substantial allies or even rivals, which again, sadly, Delwig does not. We can figure out how accepted is she among her mercenary peers. The dice indicate that she's an accepted member, well tolerated, not necessarily loved. And as a final background nugget, we can find out, how far has she been from home? Has she never left the confines of her birth town? Or has she already trotted across the continent? For Delwig, it seems, she's done some light travel, but has yet to set foot beyond 5 leagues, that's about 12 or so miles, beyond her parents' home. Nice to know she can still visit Mom, her siblings, and the father who spoils her.